those of you that are here, we're going to get kick-started with our documentary. It's going to be on for 20 or so minutes, and isn't it fantastic to see the wonderful scenery that I suppose ultimately everybody is here at COP to try and protect. So I suppose sit back and enjoy the next 20 minutes, and following that we'll have a conversation between Grace Malie and Jack Kelly. Thank you.
Halfway between Australia and Hawaii, in the midst of the Pacific Ocean, 9 tiny islands, home to the 11,000 people of Tuvalu. You may never have heard of our atoll nation, but our Polynesian ancestors navigated the vast Pacific blue and settled here. These strips of land have sustained our people for over 3,000 years. But the world is on fire.
It's now too late to leave. Seek shelter as the fire approaches.
The glass is melting. The sea is rising.
The climate time bomb is ticking.
My paradise is at the very front line and will soon be paradise lost.
Tuvalu is literally sinking. We must take action now.
A climate crisis caused by others many miles from here, and yet it's my people set to be the first to lose our entire nation to the rising waves within my lifetime.
I keep looking at their photos every single night after returning from these halls, thinking, what would I tell them upon my return from Glasgow?
To think that they'd agree on 1.5 and then do nothing about it? What are they waiting for?
We're talking in a matter of decades. That entire community and society could be wiped out from the face of the earth.
The ocean is my friend. Still is, but it is taking our lands bit by bit. It's taking our homes bit by bit. It is frightening. Right now, this current generation is questioning their future. That's the scary part, having to deal with all the adult questions at such a young age.
We will start off first with a prayer. So today we are going to have a youth workshop.
Their personal stories with climate change and how it has impacted their lives. The fear that hangs over all of us is having no choice but to leave Tuvalu and find a new homeland somewhere else.
All right, let's get started.
I want to stay here. I don't feel like I belong anywhere else but here. And I don't want to die and have a lot of regrets that when I was strong and young, I did not fight.
The sense of belonging in a community that we share here in Tuvalu. We don't want to lose that. But I also have to look after myself, also have to look after my family, my parents, and I came into conclusion that I have to migrate.
We migrated to Australia in 2012, and as a young girl, I felt lonely. I can understand why some Tuvaluans would want to stay here and not want to migrate. It's a hard life.
I have this feeling that if I move away, I'm betraying someone. And that someone is like my mother. This land is also like my mother. It's that feeling that keeps me here. And I want to die next to my forefathers. And I want my skin to go back to the land.
Our connection to land and sea is an integral part of our culture. At only 2 meters above sea level, our lives are interwoven with the ocean.
If we do not fight, no one will listen. It will be business as usual. And the consequence of that would be devastating for Tuvalu.
The ocean is rising here 1.5 times faster than the rest of the planet. So NASA is here to tell our government what's coming next.
We'll meet up in my office shortly.
We're going to talk to them about projections of future sea level rise, helping them understand the timeline at which sea level is going to rise in the future, and then connecting that to the amount of flooding that they're going to see. So it is a very stark picture based on the science. The sea level is going up very quickly and will continue to increase. So it's important information to be able to give to them.
Welcome to Tuvalu. I think it's a milestone for Tuvalu to be able to host a visit from NASA.
Thank you for having us. Indeed, it's NASA's first landing, just like on the moon. This is a Tuvalu first landing for the agency, so we're excited to be here.
We have a large suite of satellites that are constantly orbiting the planet, and we can tell you how fast oceans are rising, how fast they're encroaching on land. All water within the ocean is connected. If your glacier melts far away in Antarctica, Tuvalu would feel the rise of expanding oceans.
One of our key findings, we can assess how often Tuvalu will experience flooding in the future. But as you continue to increase sea level, eventually you're going to start to see flooding at almost every high tide.
To what extent how much countries are able to reduce their emissions would affect your projections and the forecast that now you are making in terms of the levels?
The target that you're talking about and keeping the emissions down in terms of future sea level rise, it really is everything.
Some of the changes are already locked in. We're going to see the increase in sea level even if we shut down all our fossil fuel today. However, going forward, that becomes extremely important.
The climate clock ticks down as the world promises to act. But no one is moving fast enough to stop the waves from coming.
God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do for you.
Imagine that you are having a blanket over you, right? So this would be the equivalent of greenhouse gases. Now, when we put more of those molecules into the atmosphere, we put 2 blankets on. What happens when instead of 1 blanket, you have 2 blankets on? Do you get hotter or cooler? Yes, you get hotter. What happens if you get 5 blankets on? We got really sweaty, right? But there is no place for it to go.
Climate change, sea level rise, global warming,
The global view we have at NASA, I think, is really important. You add the extreme weather to the sea level rise, to the flooding, to the storms, you're really getting hit from all fronts here in Tuvalu.
Can I please see? Thank you. Okay, so I see a house. Oh. Okay, heavy rain. I see the house is being destroyed by the water. Ne? Oh yeah? What do you have there? Let me see. Okay. Explain, please.
The house and the trees full of sea.
Okay. What happened to them?
Because the house is broken.
Oh, why?
Because you remember the storm?
Oh, okay. Oh, I see that with the lightning. Okay, so with the storm and all the big waves coming in, it destroyed the house.
Tuvalu's motto is Tuvalu with God. There's a huge dependence on our religious, faith, spiritual values that God is going to save us from this situation.
If you watch members of our Christian church about the issue of climate change. They always look at relocation, whether we have to move or not. When I talk to my elders, they say, don't worry, God will save us.
Christianity believes that after Noah's time, there won't be any other floods. Like that was the last one. I don't want to wrong my elders' thoughts about climate change, but I am a science student and I do know that climate change is real and this is what's going to happen.
I think God is also instructing us not to sit around to save ourselves.
But another flood is coming, and we may need a new ark. Not 2 by 2, but moving an entire nation. It's never been done before, yet this is now the future my government needs to negotiate.
It's the day where things will very much start to bring the countries together in order to acknowledge, the existential threat faced by Pacific atoll island countries. My name is Kamala Makran, and I am the Managing Director of the UN Global Center for Climate Mobility. Greetings to everyone. Welcome to the launch of the Rising Nation Initiative. The purpose of the Rising Nation Initiative is first and most to preserve the sovereignty, statehood, dignity and rights of the people of Tuvalu.
The existential threat we face is not our making, but it will remake us.
As our government and the Rising Nations team together take our battle into the corridors of power, it seems I have no choice but to fly across the globe and join the fight.
We are out here fighting for a voice.
People back home think, oh, you're going to Europe, you're going to see the things that we've only seen on movies.
The Eiffel Tower is right there.
But it's a burden. It's definitely a burden.
How many more stories do you want to listen to in order to take action? But we must keep holding the world to account, because reminders of our fragility are never far away.
Oh no. There's been an earthquake near New Caledonia, and people across the Pacific have been issued a warning to avoid coastal areas in case the tsunamis reach their shores. Yeah, and that includes Tuvalu.
Imagine a tsunami can hit. You wake up in the morning without Tuvalu. So that is the reality, and that is what is driving us to really get up and come to UNESCO.
Great pleasure to meet you.
Indeed, a pleasure to meet you too.
Great pleasure. We're very happy to have you here.
We are no more than 2 meters above sea level. So when we speak of impact of climate change, we are actually speaking from experience. We are living with the impacts of climate change and living with uncertainty and fear on a daily basis.
Now it's the work coming up.
A lot to work, but also to work quickly.
I know, there is urgency.
Yes.
So she's the special...
We need to work together so that culture is protected and protect the life of the people. And if we don't act quickly, then the effect would even be worse.
People really tend to act when something is really affecting themselves, but we don't have time on our side.
30 centimeters of sea level rise and it's gone.
The Rising Nations team is here to work with us in writing the first blueprint on how to preserve and rehome an entire nation. Not just for Tuvalu, but a guidebook for a world on the move in this climate-altered century.
Our goal is to have Tuvalu being designated as the first Universal World Heritage country.
I'm here on Tuvalu really scoping the potential
for this aspiration for World Heritage application.
Heritage and culture is at the core of identity, and people without identity are lost souls.
You have a saying here in Tuvalu that everything is woven. Our lives are woven into nature. When I was born, my umbilical cord was cut in two. Yep. One is buried on land, on my land, and my mum planted a coconut tree on it. Oh yeah. Yeah. And then the other half of my umbilical cord, my dad took it all the way out to the ocean and just throw it in the ocean. It will float anywhere, but guess what? You will always come to your other half, and you will join again.
But these traditional ways of life are fast being eroded.
Me now as a 24-year-old, we can't plant anything on the ground. We have to plant using food cubes or above. When I go out to the sea, you know, there's soil erosion. Places that I used to play as a child are no longer there. But you, Pa, how's life for you then?
That's really a big change. Before, full of beautiful corals like flowers.
Underwater flowers.
Yes. What worries me most is when we're going to submerge. I'm really afraid of that. I don't know who is going to survive. We don't know what's going to happen when we sleep. I don't want to leave my beautiful Tuvalu. I am.
Tuvalu will become uninhabitable long before it goes under. So, there are now difficult conversations to be had about how we stay as one nation, one culture, one people, even as Tuvalu is torn apart.
We brought together the elders from the various islands across the country to hear about their aspiration and their ambition as they face another test.
We were just voicing out and identify some of our traditional cultures that are really, disappearing. That comes with a big question. Can we turn the table to preserve that as we have known before?
If the science is right, it may simply be too late. So where else would Tuvaluans feel able to call home?
There was the idea of how to buy land, facilitating a little Tuvalu, where Tuvaluans will be together. Have you thought of the United States, the Polynesian side of the United States, Hawaii?
The USA just scares me as a country to live in. Australia is not a very accepting society for people like me. New Zealanders are by nature most kind to Pacific Islanders. New Zealand would be my choice if it comes to choosing a country. But I went to New Zealand in 1965. I always felt that I was a walking museum exhibit. There were times when I considered giving up, because it was a difficult life. But this many years later, I'm glad I didn't.
And we cannot give up the fight now either. Australia has just promised climate visas for some, and now the world's superpower is here to lend its support.
You have the most important voice of conscience because of the challenge to your homelands. And I hope we will find a way to raise that voice.
If the world allowed an entire country like Tuvalu to disappear from climate change, there would be no hope for anyone else.
We need to turn this around, and this has to be the time we do it.
The Tuvalu has been our sanctuary for generations, a sanctuary that the world is now washing away. They cannot expect our people to be dispersed or moved to a wasteland.
Imagine you and your family having to move, having to lose their identity, their culture, everything that they hold dear to heart. Imagine losing all that. That is my future today, and that may be your future tomorrow.
1.2 billion people are said to be displaced by climate change in the coming decades. This is the story of our century. How the world responds will shape all of our futures.
It's really, I mean, you can see the pictures in here. It's very reflective of what we do. So it's my honor now to introduce you to the wonderful Gracie, who is here and joined us this evening, all the way from Tuvalu, obviously. And also with her this evening, interviewing her will be Jack from Too Long Didn't Read, which is a wonderful news YouTube channel out of the UK with amazing 3 million subscribers. It's just completely brilliant what you can do today on that. So I'd like to invite the two of you to come and join us on stage and have a really fascinating conversation, I have no doubt. Thank you.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you very much for speaking with me. I think I've watched the documentary earlier, and it was really inspiring and really interesting to hear your perspective. And I was curious to start with a bit more about the process of making the documentary. Clearly, you have a very deep link and connection to the country, it being your home country. But I was interested to hear more about the stories you were hoping to amplify through the documentary. What was the message? What were you trying to get across? And which stories were you trying to tell most?
Great. I think I'll start off with pointing the fact that whenever we would travel out of Tuvalu, people would be quite puzzled when they see the Tuvalu passport. And then they'd have to use their phones and search on Google where Tuvalu is.
Yeah.
So I'll start off there. Not many people know where Tuvalu is. And if they don't know where Tuvalu is, they don't know the problems that we're currently facing. And that is an existential threat to our lives, and that is climate change. And so the documentary, the main concern of the documentary was trying to get the voices from our own country to show to the rest of the world what is actually happening in Tuvalu, how climate change is impacting the current generation of Tuvalu, and how it will impact the next generation. And so that was the main concept of the documentary, just gathering the voices from the front line to the international community.
Absolutely. And I mean, the voices are clearly a core element of the story throughout the documentary. You see all generations discussing this issue. You've got the children in schools learning about it from the experts from NASA and also being asked to draw the pictures of what they see in the future. You've got the people of younger adult generation discussing their future, where they want to live, whether they're going to stay on the islands or not. And you also see the older generations who have kind of lived through this progress and are looking forward to what follows for their children and grandchildren. I'd be interested to hear more about those kind of generational divides. What are the differences in opinions between the younger people and the older people and the different perspectives they have?
Thank you. I believe I didn't answer one part of your question in the beginning, so I'll just answer that and then happily answer this one.
Sure.
This documentary
was obviously a community and village effort. It wouldn't have been done without the help of Channel 4 News, Global Center for Climate Mobility, NASA, Rising Nations Initiative, and the people of Tuvalu. And so the credit is all to them, and it was for them and by them. And so when we were producing this, it took about 6 months, and the team was there for 2 weeks. And then when they traveled back, we had a lot of going back and forth through emails, audio messages, trying to get the recording right, trying to get the facts right, so that we represent our nation best to the international community. Now, coming back to your question, it's funny because in Tuvalu, we start talking about climate change at such a young age because we are exposed to it. And so climate literacy in our community is very much alive because the current generation thinks that having the sea coming into our roads, into our homes during tropical cyclones or even during storms, they think that it is normal, but it isn't. And so having that climate literacy within our homes, because it starts within our homes, is very important. And so the conversation starts from home. We are very blessed to have our grandparents. So in our homes in Tuvalu, we have extended families. We have grandparents, we have parents and aunties and uncles, and then you have the children with their nieces and nephews. So it's that feeling of everyone being together, talking about their day over dinner, and sharing about what's happening around the world, what's happening in their own worlds. And so we are forced to sort of sensitive questions such as, what will happen to Tuvalu? People are already talking about, in 2050, Tuvalu will be underwater. Tuvalu will be submerged. Tuvalu will be uninhabitable. And I look at the eyes of my nieces and nephews every time we have this conversation, and they would just look away. Nobody wants to talk about Tuvalu being uninhabitable because it is our home and we deserve every right to remain in our homes. And it is unfair for them. It is injustice. And so that's why we're all here and we're doing everything that we can to get the justice that we need.
I'm interested to hear a bit more about those younger people who are having those really difficult conversations from childhood in the schools. I mean, it's quite an emotional moment in the documentary when you see the future they see for their country that they're drawing out is not a bright picture. I'm interested how that's communicated with young people and how they process that. Like, how do you process the reality that your country might not exist anymore? It's difficult, obviously.
Yes, no, but I think to answer that question, I would start first with faith. In Tuvalu, the main common theme under the Tuvalu flag, it says, Tuvalu mote tua, which means Tuvalu with God.
Okay.
So coming from a very religious background, we believe that God will help us from this climate crisis. That is our tupunas, that's our grandparents' thinking. Coming down to the current generation now, we see data, we see facts, we see scientific reports, and it's all coming down to that, Tuvalu becoming uninhabitable in 2050. And so we are working in so many community-led projects, adaptation, mitigation projects. We are restoring corals. We are working on solar renewable projects back home. So every youth isn't idle. Every youth is trying to make themselves involved in many community projects that will actually benefit our country. And some of them are in my line of work, which is climate advocacy. And so we are trying everything that we can to really put Tuvalu out there and let the people know what's happening back home.
Yeah, I think so. I'm interested as well in the older generations too. We saw them in the documentary. We saw them kind of meeting and discussing the past and also what they saw for the future. Is there a divide in attitudes between generations, or is there kind of common understanding between?
Yes, I think there is a divide.
Okay.
there are certain older people who wish to move. So Tuvalu now currently signed the Falepili Union Treaty with Australia.
Yes.
And that's sort of like our plan B, where Tuvaluans, 250 Tuvaluans per year are allowed to move to Australia. And our grandparents are actually looking forward to that.
Okay.
Because they, some of them did not have the privilege of traveling around the world. So they wanted to explore Australia.
Sure.
But my grandfather, at the end of the day, he would always say, I want to stay in Tuvalu. I want to remain in Tuvalu. And there's a connection between Tuvalu, the land, and the ocean. And it starts from birth. So as soon as your mother delivers you, the placenta is being buried onto the land, into the land. And that shows that you come from the land, and then you will go back to the land.
Yeah.
So having that connection, my grandfather says, if I were to die, bury me in my land, in Tuvalu.
Yeah.
So what happens when Tuvalu becomes uninhabitable?
Yeah.
What happens when we move away from Tuvalu? Will I be able to fulfill my grandfather's promise?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, need.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to the kind of demands and the thoughts of people in Tuvalu, I'm interested in the perspective, or if there is a common perspective on what the international community ought to be doing. Clearly there's more to be done and there's more that should be done, but is there a common thought around what is expected from the international community, or is that fractured?
There is actually. And number one is funding.
Yes.
Finance.
Yeah.
The current one that we're actually pushing for in the negotiation rooms is the loss and damage fund. We contribute the very least to climate change, and yet we are facing the most brutal impacts.
Yeah.
And it is completely unfair. It is a injustice, and that's what our people are trying to get out here. And mostly on mitigation and adaptation efforts. And the 1.5 degrees Celsius is out there. It was in the Paris alignment, And then we also have the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. We're thinking of so many things, the Pacific and the Oceania community, to tell to the international community, hey, these are actually solutions that you can actually do to actually stop, because the seas are rising in Tuvalu. The seas are rising in the Pacific. And many of our people live on the coastal lines, close to the sea. What happens if we are already experiencing flooding, even when it's not a tropical cyclone, even if it's just a storm? We experience those little things. So it gets worse and worse every year.
Yeah.
And every time we come to COP, the outcomes are very disappointing. Because when we come here, we give so much of ourselves. We present so many stories, but then at the end, the result is disheartening.
Well, my next question was going to be about the progress being made, and clearly there is the issues there with the progress that's being made. Not enough is happening. Do you feel like there is progress at all? I mean, obviously there's a lot of conversation and there is action happening, but do you think we are headed in the right direction at least? And if so, how much more needs to be done before we are on the right track, in your opinion?
Good question. I would really like to commend the efforts of the Pacific and the Oceania negotiation leaders and ministers who are in the negotiation rooms holding down the fort for the past 29 COPs.
Yeah.
And I would also like to commend the efforts of our international brothers and sisters who joined us in this fight, donor partners. So with that, 2 years ago, they started mentioning renewable energy, 1.5 degrees Celsius, fossil fuels are now being transcribed into the, into the language.
Yeah.
But it's taken so long, 29 COPs. How many more COPs? And then they'll say, oh, there's actually funds now in the loss and damage fund, enough to help you with this crisis. It might take more. But we're doing everything that we can out here. And I don't know how else to say that, but I do have hope, because the new generation, the youths these days, are really powerful, and they're using technology to have storytelling, social media, and I believe that that's quite a powerful tool in our current generation to help us with this problem.
Yeah, storytelling is an important issue, I think, in a lot of climate discourse and a lot of climate media. Is often the entire topic is kind of pushed aside as kind of too depressing, too hard to deal with, and people choose to disengage from it because it feels like such a huge problem. Yet stories like this one and documentaries like this one really humanize and bring to life the story and the reason that this matters. Now, this is obviously a particularly compelling example. This is a really beautiful narrative of a real struggle that's going on. Outside of that, what advice would you have for people who are trying to communicate stories like this? This naturally lends itself to being a compelling story of a island nation in real despair. But what can we learn from this when telling stories around climate about how to communicate and how to have that conversation in a way that makes a difference?
I don't know how to exactly answer that question, but storytelling is something that the Pacific Islanders are just naturally gifted with. And storytelling can't just be through advocacy or talking like this. It can be through music, telling your story through music. It can be through dancing. The traditional dances that we have back home, each move depicts the moves of the ocean, the way that our land sustains us, the way that the birds in the skies interact, and how we are very blessed to have these things around us. And so we can learn so much from these other forms of storytelling that I think our people from the other countries could learn and do. And the thing with how we can get our stories across is we just need people to share them, to be other people, to amplify those messages to other people. Because the more we talk about something that's happening back home, the more people will pay attention to us, and the more action will go from there.
Yeah.
I hope I answered that question.
No, absolutely. No, it's interesting the different ways that it can be communicated. It doesn't always have to be a conversation that feels kind of abstract and about numbers and trillions of pounds of investment that clearly is important and that is ultimately the result we need. But the way you reach that and the way you engage people doesn't have to be through that kind of, that lens. That's not how you're going to appeal to the average person, probably. You obviously are doing a whole bunch of work. This documentary is a part of your kind of advocacy more generally. And I'd be curious to hear what else is being done at the moment? What are the conversations that are happening? What are you doing beyond the work we've already seen?
So in the documentary, I believe everyone has noticed that we work very closely with our communities. And currently back home, there are so many developing projects, English is my second language, that are helping our nation adaptation efforts. So currently we have the Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project, which is reclaiming land, trying to expand our land so that we have more space to move about. And currently back home, we are trying to learn our culture, our history, and our traditions, because climate change poses, I say this because it's so, climate change poses such an existential threat to our lives, because if we lose our land, we lose who we are.
Yeah.
We lose our identity. If we are to move a Tuvalu into another land, it won't be the same.
No.
And so we are currently working with the communities, learning about our traditions, learning about our cultures, trying to gain more sense of our identity so that when that actually happens, and I pray it doesn't, when we get to relocate, we are able to share these same things to the next generation, not in the same way, like how it would be back home.
Of course.
But they at least get a sense of who they are.
I think that cultural element is something that comes across through the documentary really clearly, that you could imagine this as an issue and you immediately think of the issue of where are these people going to go? What is the migration conversation that's going to happen? There's a lot of arguments about that generally around the world, and climate is only going to make migration issues worse in all kinds of places as people become displaced for all kinds of climate-related issues. But I think beyond the kind of practicality of it, and I think this documentary raises it very well, is the cultural impact. Is exactly as you're saying, like, you can move people, but where you move them matters, and how you move them matters. And it's interesting that you're preparing already. What do those cultural efforts look like at the moment? What is happening to kind of preserve the culture of the country if it reaches that point?
Great. We're currently documenting. Before, our ancestors, passing generational knowledge to the next is through orals. So it's through chants, it's through movements, and over time that needs to be changed because now we have technology.
Yeah.
So we use technology. We started recording our traditions through the traditional dancing, and other generational knowledge that we can't actually share just for ourselves. So we've been doing that, and we've been having lessons with the younger kids within our community because there are certain parts of our culture that we cannot actually teach. We would need our aunties and our tupulas to actually come and teach them. So it's a learning process. We're still learning, and we're still filming, and we're still recording. So it's gonna take a while.
Absolutely, and I mean, obviously, hopefully, it doesn't reach the point that all of that is necessary. I'm curious, as kind of a final big question on, you are obviously still hopeful. You are putting in all this work and all this activism to reach a better place. And you say that there is progress being made. And I'm curious, what is giving you the most hope at the moment? What action, what support, what advocacy do you think is leading to the best results? And what hope do you have for your country and kind of the world in general?
I think what fuels me in this advocacy work is just really trying to become a good ancestor to my people. I see, as I mentioned, I see my nieces and my nephews, and that pushes me in this fight to continue fighting for a future that they deserve, that they need. And having and knowing how my ancestors traveled and navigated the Pacific waters, ocean waters, without using any technology, but just navigating using the stars and the winds. And just knowing how much knowledge and mana that they have, that actually pushes me further. So if I'm sitting like this, it's not anything bad, but I actually picture my family, my community, my island, and my ancestors around me. I feel them with me whenever when I'm given this type of spaces, because I'm not representing myself. I'm representing the people back home. I'm representing my whenua, my land. And so that pushes me in this.
Yeah. And you're doing an incredible job of advocating for them. So. You really are. This documentary I was blown away by. I think it tells the story in an incredible way, and I think the work you're doing is clearly very impactful and very powerful. So thank you for that. Amazing. Thank you all for watching and for attending. I hope you enjoyed hearing the story and learning more. And yeah, thank you so much to Grace for all of your work. It's really incredible. Thank you.